Welcome back to Sanyin Podcast. Today, I'm joined by the amazing Janice Nkaija, who is a social activist, public speaker, podcaster, a lot of things. Miss Janice, you're welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, for someone who is watching or listening and may not know you, how would you introduce yourself?
I am Janice Nkaija. I am currently an international law student who's particularly passionate about public policy and civic engagement. I am an award-winning public speaker because I've done competitive debate and public speech for quite some time. But most recently, I've become what everyone is calling an influencer because I decided to wake up and talk about my political views online that have gained traction recently. So that's a brief introduction about myself. And I like everything politics, the law, and political conversation because I believe it's a very genuine conversation my generation should be having. That's quite a bit about it.
Okay, let's talk about your social activism work. When someone checks your TikTok, you're talking about the political things in Uganda. Sometimes you branch into Africa. Um, why did you start it, and how did it click into you that now I'm going to use my platforms to share how politics and civil society is working?
Mm-hmm. I used to do something similar, but not on my TikTok, on my WhatsApp status, and my friends were so full of it. They were like, you know what, please move this some elsewhere. Another time, I think TikTok had become a thing, but like I didn't know. I only saw people dancing on TikTok, so I've never really thought of having a more conversation or approach to it. I said last year around June, when one of my friends sent me a page of a creator called Jukira. I don't know if you know her. She just essentially talks about African heritage on her TikTok, and it's like, hey, you could do something like this, but for politics. And I was like, And so I started doing it. It was, of course, just me making commentary on things that and giving my perspective on things that I thought should be having a conversation into. But then at that time, it had not yet developed into policy, right? Until I started pursuing my degree, my law degree, and then understanding further how these systems work on a more complex level. And I feel like these were conversations people should be having on the internet or information that if you did not go to law school, you would never have access to. And unfortunately, these are things that many people need to have access to, especially because they're actively engaging in politics on a regular basis and it concerns them. And so that's how it started. One opinion, one video led to another, and currently over 70,000 people follow me for some reason that I cannot explain.
Amazing, amazing. So, we got some questions from our listeners. So one of them is touching about that, and they say that, hey JP, please ask Janice if she fears for being caught up by a drone. I think many people have asked you this.
Yes, very people have asked me this. In fact, I keep getting comments and DMs talking about pink drones and how a pink drone will come for me. Funny fact is that I have been called several times by unknown individuals threatening my family, threatening me to stop talking about what I'm talking about, but I still do it anyway. I reached at a point whereby I think I stopped for about 2 months because it was getting a little bit overboard. To the point whereby I made a video joking about a pink drone. I think that was around that time they had abducted Eddie Mutwe. Um, and so I made a joke about the pink drone. And when, because they keep asking me what color of a drone do they want, and I'm like, oh, you should give me a pink one because I'm a girl. But like after that, I realized that this is what is done. If each time someone tries to challenge authority, tries to challenge perspective, they either threaten or shake them into stopping. And I guess it was at that time where I realized that what's the whole point really? So I didn't stop. I stopped a bit because my parents were really worried for me. But at the end, I thought about it and I was like, if I'm not going to have these conversations, and if each person who tries to have this conversation backs out, then who will? And so I continued. I can't say that I'm 100% safe because I might say something very explosive tomorrow. But I guess I've learned how to navigate the things I talk about and try to discuss them from a more nuanced, introspective perspective than one that is more of we are going to abuse the government type of vibe that what most people are doing, which is very counterintuitive. And that's the route I've decided to take.
A fun fact is that at some point I also received those phone calls, but I wouldn't go that direction. However, the question that I'm next is almost in that direction, because it's by I'll hide the name, but he's literally asking JP, why is this young girl dictating political agendas for our country? Yes, she was just barely born 2 weeks ago. I don't know how do you like how do you answer questions for people who feel like you're not old enough to lecture about Ugandan's politics because of your age? Literally, I think that's what the question is best saying.
Okay, the fact is I am young and I do not, and I'm very proud. It's a privilege to be young. And I think I am privileged because I've had access to so much information and exposure because I've had the opportunity to travel around the world and see how systems in other nations work in contrast to my own. So naturally, I'm seeing there's a huge fundamental problem from a very basic level where other countries are complaining about increasing, for example, pension or just making people's lives better and arguing about foreign policy. Kampala is flooding. And there are so many things that people just keep watching and brushing off. And I'm not lecturing people. I don't tell people to watch my videos. They actively decide to make that decision. And so I'm not going to ignore the fact that I could still be young. I could still have a lot to learn, but I'm not ignorant. And I'm so grateful for the exposure and the education that I've received. And I'm deciding to use that particular information that I have to use the channels that we are currently having to try to make impact in one way or another. I know most people would prefer to see me dancing and then sexualize me, but unfortunately, I would rather talk about the law, talk about policy. I'm not trying to lecture anyone. I am a huge respecter of elders. That's why you'll never find me insulting a head of state or anyone. Because but the matter of fact that they're in that particular leadership position, ideally you should accord some level of respect to them. I only seek to have nuanced conversation and difficult conversations with the older generation. And unfortunately, most people are not comfortable with being told that what they're doing is not all right. So instead of taking in the feedback, they would rather, for example, push back like that comment and say, why are you telling me what to do? I'm older than you, kind of mentality.
That's a nice feedback. That's a really nice clap back to that. My next question would be coming from Uganda right now. There is no lady standing for president, and one of the I would say the standpoints of what the government would say is that they have given space for women to take part in leadership. Maybe look at the women MPs per district. But according to you, do you think Uganda and Africa at large have given women a platform to take part in politics?
That's an interesting one because it's as an African continent, we are still struggling with patriarchal tendencies of that women cannot do certain things. But at the same time, there have been very significant strides taken to give women access because you can't stand for presidency as a woman. The question is, will you win? And one thing that I've understood about politics in general is that you cannot just wake up tomorrow and win an election. It takes years of dedication, years of going up the political ladder, years of getting people to know you. I've grown up my whole life learning and hearing about Rebecca Kadaga. You get me? So it goes. It's not that there's no access for women. It's just that women are not willing to go down that journey. And that's like a very awakening thing. Women should step up to actually take this challenge on and keep pushing and keep pushing, because we shall not be given things on a silver plate, unfortunately, in a world, especially in a world that seeks for equality or equity or whatever. We have been given almost the same access of education, the same access to almost every single thing. So as much as there's still inherent biases about women in leadership, that should not stop women from still taking up those spaces, because unless you break that barrier, then no one else would actually see that it's actually possible. So there are inherent biases of what a woman can do in a place of position of politics, but it still doesn't mean that women have not been given access, because there's no law in Uganda that says a woman cannot stand for presidency. I think that's a decision women make and decide, this year we are not going to, because ideally when they were doing nomination forms, women did come and pick up the nomination forms, they just didn't submit them. You get me? And so that alone shows that they were just not willing, or in their opinion they were like, okay, this is not my race, I will come back later when I have a higher probability of running, which is also great, because we don't just want to participate, we actually want to win. So that in itself is something that we should think about more clinically. So that women have not been given the opportunity. It's just that women are not necessarily taking up those spaces in the most rigorous way possible.
Do you think one day Uganda will have a female president in your lifetime?
In my lifetime, if I do decide to run for presidency, I will be the president. But my dreams are bigger than the presidency of Uganda. I keep telling this joke, I want to become the United Nations Secretary General, because we haven't had a woman who will take that position. Because my primary interest is actually into international affairs and international law, so that's where I see my trajectory. But we can do that. I'm just 20 years old, so at least I have 80 more to see that realizes. I do believe, but then we need, because I'm seeing so many incredible young women currently participating in policy. My personal favorite is, I think there are two, Julia Muhumuza, I don't know if you have heard of her, and Shamim Nambasa. I think those are like young women who are taking on the political ladder and they're moving up the ladder in a systematic form. I do not, in the next 40 years, if they do stand for those positions, I'll not be surprised at all, because they have shown that they're actually moving up that ladder, and they are going to do it at a point in time.
A funny thing, you've answered two questions from that reply. And the question was asking that, tell Janice that her friend Julia has contested for National Youth MP. Do we see her in the ballot in 2031? Well, I think, I don't know if you'll be in the ballot in 2031, but I think you're going for international posts. And then the next question, which I don't know, you may answer, you may not answer, is which political party does Janice support?
I don't support a political party. I support a political ideology. As a person who has recently been reading because I read the manifestos, and I read the NRM manifesto, as much as people refuse to admit it, that manifesto was incredible. Why? For the following reasons. They have the experts on their side, right? So they have the brilliant minds writing these policies in government. The biggest problem that we are having as a system is that those policies are never going to come into life, because the leadership itself of the NRM does not suffocate anyone who tries to revolutionize the way we see things are happening. They are so comfortable with corruption to the point that they have made it a norm. That's the problem with an NRM government. They have all the resources, both intellectual, financial, and in regards to making influence, they have all that capacity, but they have refused to make the impact. The problem with the NOPE people is that they are focusing so much on removing the current head of state, and they're ignoring that it doesn't stop at removing the current head of state. There is actually a nation to rule, and it's a very complex situation. In that, you're not going to don't have just look at national policy, but foreign policy. Are we going to look at the army? Like, it is such a big deal. It is not just about removing the presidency. It's a whole bigger thing. And until the National Unity Platform stops putting so much energy into trying to bash the current government and more into how are they going to create systemic partnerships to ensure that even when this government gets off, we're not going to have various issues coming in because of a transition of power. I've looked at FTC. I'm a huge fan of Dr. Kizza Besigye because he is a testimony to not giving up. He's been doing it all his life. But also, like, the biggest thing with Uganda's opposition is they're not serious, in my opinion, because they are so fragmented. And the only way, for example, to have influence in, like, for example, the parliament is if we had more than 70% of parliamentary seats being opposition, most of the decisions in that parliament would be different. But we are in a situation whereby 70 or 80% of the positions in parliament are NRM. In that particular system, how then are we supposed to effect any change? So I am not for any political party. I'm for ideologies that want to see this world better. And I'm a very practical person. I'm not going to be blind that just because I don't necessarily agree with the NRM, so I'm going to go with a party that doesn't have a plan. I think I think I also struggle with that because they're always saying that if you're not for something, if you're not for anything, then what are you for? And I struggle with that one myself. But at the same time, I'm very realistic with myself, and I'm like, I'm not going to just follow a group of people just because they want to take off something that I don't want. I want them to have a plan to assure me that even when they get there, they'll be able to sustain it and create a system that is sustainable. That is my response to that particular question.
Wow. I think it's the first time I'm going to confess on this podcast. I support Mugisha Muntu and the Alliance for National Transformation. I believe in their message. I think their politics is less of emotion, more of an ideology. But I think Uganda's problem is we have politics of emotion rather than policy. And I don't know what's your take on that. Like, should we just go with emotion? Or should we just... Because, I don't know, the common man wants the sweet messaging, the lovey-dovey that comes with the most politicians. And this, I wouldn't say elite, but, you know, those that think they are politically mature would want, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. So what's your take on policy of emotion and strategy?
As a person who actually creates content on that, I firsthand experience it on a daily basis. For example, I made recently a video on Lucy. And he's a very, when I get into parliament, I'm going to do this. MPs should come driving their own cars. We're not going to drive. And I'm like, yes. I'm like, these are things we've been talking about over and over again. And I was assessing that you cannot just make a parliament full of elites, right? Yet we are representing Omuntu wa bulijjo. Like, you need to get people who understand the system, but at the same time, people who are not necessarily there for the money. Oh, Anange, they abused me, they have me, like there are certain things. And so I do understand politics of emotion so much because people then try so hard to respond to defend their candidate, not from a place of arguing for them, like solidifying their argument, but they result into abusing you. I've received so many insults. I have learned new words in Luganda in regards to the insult section because of this particular thing that I do. But politics in general is emotional politics. It's not even just Africa, it's America. You see the debates going on in America and see how politics in America works, calling foreigners these illegal aliens. It's all jargon. It's all to be a politician, you have to be a natural born soothsayer. When you speak, people believe in you and you have the ability to rally. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that because to a certain extent, certain people are not going to care about assessing how fiscal policy is going to be solved. That's sometimes too complex for everyone, right? And they would rather hear that I'm going to do this, not necessarily how. We need to reach to a point that, yes, we can use a strategy to encourage people to vote for you, but honestly, it goes down to if you're going to say what you said you are going to say. Because Ugandans don't. You're not going to go to deep villages because I get buried in. If I die unmarried, I'll be buried in Mubende. You're not going to go in the deep ends of Mubende and start explaining fiscal policy to people who do not have water, right? People there would rather want you to hear that I'm going to build for you dams or wells. I'm going to bring for you electricity. You get me? So you meet people where they are, and that's why I don't necessarily have a problem with emotional politics. I just have a problem with the leaders who use it but then never really get to do what they promise to do, because then that becomes very defeating. That's why your voters will keep eating your campaign money and not vote for you, like how the people of Machindia did Lucy. uh, but it's more of strategy in regards to rallying for votes. It becomes a problem when you use it and then not do what you said you're going to do. So I think that's the problem we have, because the politics everywhere in the world is full of banter, it's full of emotional politics. It's like a general phenomenon. My issue is mainly when you actually get into that position of power, what do you do with that power? That is where the actual issue comes in.
Yeah. Before we leave Ugandan politics and go to another topic, there are two questions here for you. The first one is, what does Janice think of senior six vacists, 18, who want to stand for president and barely stood for head prefect? And then the next question is, what does Janice think about Indians standing for MP positions in Uganda?
I actually wrote I wrote an article on the first topic about how the article was called the Ugandan election has become a group project where everyone thinks they have an. First things, I uphold them for their courage and they know their civic right. I can be president if I want to. I can run. And that's incredible because not everyone knows that, right? But again, it goes down to strategy. At this point in time, we're not just looking for participants to run for presidency. We want for people who are actually going to run and have the capacity to actually win the presidency, right? It is not, we're at a point in our lives where we're not looking for participation, but rather competition. And I think at that point in time, it was a bit defeating because now, okay, yes, you can run, but like there's student politics at university. There are so many other places where you can politically engaged or even support your candidates who are running for presidency, right? But for you to try to run for presidency without what exactly are you trying to do? I know I had a conversation with one of the people who wanted to run for presidency and they were in the 20 category, and their argument was that they wanted to show young people that young people can run and they're allowed to participate in politics. And I'm like, but the point you're trying to prove is already happening. We have the Julia Muhumuzas running for big positions, right? So running for presidency should be strategic, not just for show. We don't want another Katumba. You get me? It doesn't make sense. The second question, I think I've forgotten what the second question was. Repeating it.
The second question was, what do you think of Ugandans of Indian origin standing for MPs?
Ugandans of Indian origin, because it all goes down to our constitution and what citizenship is. You get me? If they are citizenship by naturalization, they have the right to run for a political position. I think we, as a country, we have so many issues, from tribalism to so many things that people based on to want to push other people out based on identity. But according to the constitution and the law, they're allowed to run for those positions because they are legally Ugandans and they are legally allowed to run. Whether or not they win, that goes down to you, the voters, whether or not you want a mayor from Indian descent. But it really doesn't make any sense because currently we have Magdani in the US who was born in Uganda. He's of Indian heritage, born in Uganda, but is running for mayor of New York in the US. And so with all those different dynamics, if someone is legally in a place and the law allows them to do a thing, I don't think then that should be a problem. If you don't want them to run for mayor and win, you run for mayor and win. honestly.
I think this question highlights the bit of I wouldn't say xenophobia, but people feel like foreigners should just stay away from Ugandan politics. But it's an opinion. My next question to you would be: you've traveled many countries, you've studied many countries' political systems, and also in relation to Africa. When you compare the geopolitics part of the world now, east, west, you have the west of the EU and the US on one side, China, Russia on the other side. Which partner do you think Africa has a better chance to work with in a win win scenario?
Let me tell you something that they don't tell us when it comes to foreign policy. In foreign policy, there's no such thing as a win-win scenario. In foreign policy is that we have something called you benefit, I benefit, but I have the capacity to benefit more than you benefit. So it's never really about a win-win. It's more about who can assert more influence and attain more from the partnership that has been built. That's why I'm very, very interested in this particular field. Is because Africa is doing terribly. A few things. One, the US is not reliable, depending on the president who, who, who is ruling the US, who's the president of the US at that particular time. So politics in the US predominantly relies on the head of state. And so it's not reliable. The EU, on the other hand, is it's a more nuanced system based on the fact that it's a collection of states. And most recent years, the EU has done more work and has tried to do more work in engaging with African states more than any other place. China is big. China, Russia, I don't have any comments for Russia. China, they are business people. And so where they see the money, they'll go for the money. And so it's a bit tricky for China because if people solely want a resource from you, we have seen this from history, from colonialism. If people are constantly wanting a resource from you, it becomes very, very difficult to balance a relationship within them because they're going to constantly drain from you because now we're having land leases for 50 years to Chinese companies and governments to just get loans. You get me? So with all these things intertwining and intersecting, we have to reach a point whereby we have strong foreign policy systems on the African continent if you're going to have African people compete on an international level. We don't have any single African country in the UN Security Council. Yet the UN Security Council pulls all the shots. Who are we bombing? Who are we sending peacekeeping troops to? All these things make it very, very difficult for the African continent to compete if we don't have anyone up there where we need to have people up there. Yeah.
Do you think the African Union joining the G20 was a positive step in that direction?
Yeah, definitely. We have, because you have to go with world systems. For example, when the World Bank was created, when the United Nations was created, the moment we decide to actively exclude ourselves from those particular places, we are falling years behind. And so I guess it was a very brilliant decision to decide to join the G20, because at the end of the day, we have to play with the big boys if we want to become a big boy ourselves.
And then this tricky question I want to ask, let me ask it to you. If Africa is to be on the Security Council, which African countries will be there? Because definitely not all of them. They'll select maybe one or two. In your opinion, which will those be?
Okay, so let me go nerdy here. How the Security Council works is that we have 15 seats on the Security Council, but 5 veto powers. So we have this thing called, so the other 10 work on a rotational basis. So meaning we can have an African country, but they work on rotational basis. But the veto 5 are the ones that say, for example, if we are voting on a resolution and one of them say doesn't agree, the resolution does not go through. That's the power of a veto power. And in most cases, veto powers are the ones that have the most, either the most resources, financial backing, or the GDP is strong. So you see kind of the vetoes are Russia, US, France, UK. And so we have to think, what are the biggest nations in Africa currently? It's either South Africa, because when you look at the whole of Central West Africa, it's either South Africa or North Africa. And the problem with North Africa is that they don't necessarily subscribe to being African. They subscribe to being Middle Eastern. And so with that all in play, the most probable nations to actually get into the UN Security Council currently, South Africa would definitely be on top of the list. And if you're to think of West African nations are constantly in coup d'etats. They're unreliable. If you're going to think of East African nations, I think East African nations, Rwanda would beat us because currently they are growing way faster. Frankly speaking, their GDP is growing way faster than any other East African country combined. Their tech is moving way, way faster. So in my thinking, in comparison to the geopolitics going on currently, South Africa and Rwanda would have the best options. But what would push Rwanda out, because they are a tiny nation in comparison to a nation like South Africa, I think that's where the politics will come in, because you have to have money and you have to be a strong power, either military wise, financial wise, or GDP wise.
The man of Nigeria, because I have a lot of Nigerians listening.
Okay, for Nigeria particularly, that's a very, very interesting one, because I also have very many Nigerian friends who are constantly talking about the politics going on in their country. Nigeria is a very huge economic power in regards to oil, and they are really taking off in that particular direction. Nigeria would be a great contender, given their. I'm just thinking of Nigeria because I'm thinking of from a foreign policy perspective. That's where I'm thinking from, not necessarily from a numbers perspective. I'm thinking for a foreign policy perspective, because we hear more of South Africa in foreign policy than we hear Nigeria. You get me? Because all these things, that's the biggest issue with foreign policy. It's that it is politics after all, and they are constantly looking for nations. They have that are always within the circle. So Nigeria would be a great contender because they are huge money bag for oil. But are they really that into foreign policy as a nation? Question mark. That is where I think Nigeria would be lacking.
Okay, then what's your view on BRICS? Uganda, Nigeria, BRICS, and it's expanding. So what's your take on BRICS?
Yeah. BRICS. Currently, the world is running on regional blocks. So from ESC to ECOWAS to COMESA to the EU, now BRICS. These groupings are very strategic, based on financial or economic backing, or even what political agendas they are trying to push at a particular time. Us who are viewing from the outside, we can never be sure what the motive is. That's very frankly speaking. Because of course these movements will tell us things like, oh, we're trying to promote economic development or security purposes, but governments will always make agreements with them, not secret agreements, but like very private agreements within themselves that they'll never expose to the public as to why that particular agreement has been made. That's also the nuance with international relations and foreign policy. And so in regards, on the outside, BRICS looks as a great opportunity for financial and security purposes, right? But as African nations, in the long run, we always face the challenge that we are dealing with nations that have more authority and power than we do, not only in foreign policy, but also in money. So we are constantly at the mercy of those nations when we get into these particular partnerships. So they might make particular decisions that mainly benefit them, but substantially affect us. You get me? And so with that regard, I guess whoever the policymakers are for those nations getting into those particular groupings, I hope you have a great and strong international lawyers who will be able to fight those legal battles for you when the time comes, because there'll always be legal battles in foreign policy. Yeah.
Okay. Let's divert from foreign policy. So I've seen your podcast, listened to a few episodes. So just briefly tell me about your podcast, Janice on the Mic.
Janice on the Mic has been a project I started in COVID-19. I was idle and I didn't have what to do, so I started interviewing people who I found very interesting. So from youth leaders, and then it morphed into a space for having youth discussion. So from politics to policy, politics and policy are different, but in the same time, so I might keep to just music or just having general conversations about social issues, right, on a more global scale. And it was originally predominantly on Spotify, but I've now tried to move to YouTube because I realized people don't want to listen to anything that is not visual. It's been a project I've been working on for a while, and I hope it grows into something bigger. But it's my baby that I keep building on every year, and I hope it turns into something extraordinary. But let's just say it's a hobby like my TikTok.
Will you invite me one day to be a guest there? Share my radical views.
Definitely.
As we conclude, I'll just briefly ask you, for the youth listening right now, both in Uganda and the continent, what advice would you give them?
That's a very interesting one. So I have to think about it because it's very big. I'm gonna say follow your dreams. And as cliche and as average that might sound, it's okay to dream big. And unfortunately, we have been born in a system that doesn't enable us to follow our dreams, because we are born in a system that prefers security. And so you always be pushed to seek for security rather than taking the risk and daring to do something differently. And that has always crushed people's dreams and pushed them into this mediocrity, because they want to be like everyone else and have a stable life, which is also a good thing. So I would like push for your dreams. My friends and I was joking about trying to fight the matrix so that we don't get sucked in. And our strategy is that we are going to do it both ways. As much as we are fighting the matrix, we are going to chase a career, chase our money, but at the same time chase our dreams. In that you don't have, because since we are born in a society that has hotwired us into seeking security, naturally even our strategies are going to seek security. And as I seek to be the UN Secretary General, I'm also going to chase my other dreams of sharing my radical views, or like building a charity, and trying to strike the balance between both. And as much as life may try to pull you away from that, if you really want something, and you can always chase it. If you realize you cannot do a double life, you can as well just drop one thing and chase the other. But never, I think the biggest regret you could have is not having tried at all. So you'd rather try until trying almost gets you killed. Until then, chase your dreams, however crazy they might be, however cynical they might be. I'm a Christian, so I strongly believe that God cannot place a dream in your heart that He has not given you the capacity to fulfill. And young people in Africa, we are the most cultured, we are the coolest people you would ever meet. There's nowhere in the world you'll meet and you find anyone cooler than you, because you have better sense of fashion, better sense of style, you have better music, better food, and you are melanated. Something that the world tries so hard to make you feel bad about yourself, but in fact it's amazing. And so you are the prize, and that the world is just scared of the capacity you have if you actually tap into your full potential. I think that's what I would say.
Wow. My last question would be, what makes you a proud Ugandan?
What makes me a proud Ugandan? I would say wearing the Ugandan jersey, but we never really win any matches. So the Ugandan cranes. What makes me proudly Ugandan should probably Joshua Baraka, because he is Uganda's biggest export currently. And I love being at home. What makes me proudly Ugandan is the community. Ugandans are the most hospitable people you will find anywhere else in the world, which is insane. My favorite thing to do every single time I'm at home is to go talk to my Rolex guy, get me a Rolex, ask him how his day was, and how people can simply make connections and talk to you, whether you are having a conversation with your boda guy who can't stop telling you about his heartbreak, or you go into the market and this lady is asking you whether or not you are married. It's how people want to connect in Uganda, something that is not common elsewhere in the world. That makes me proudly Ugandan, that despite our differences, despite how we may be in a system that doesn't necessarily give us the best, we still find the capacity to love each other and be simply Ugandan. I think that's why I'm proudly Ugandan, because Ugandan people are in fact amazing.
Okay, thank you, Miss Janice, for coming. We truly appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.